Hey there, this is Matt O'Leary, and I wanted to give a short little intro to this great, super interesting chat I had with my good friend Michael, aka Notes Reviews from Toronto, Canada. We, of course, dissected the new Thank You Scientist album, as much as you can for an album of that density. And then we talked about just prog in general. And Notes really specializing in prog. We're both really fascinated to hear what you think of that whole conversation and debate. And we had some technical difficulties just with the beginning of this video, so you'll hear us kind of go into this conversation about the thing that really sets Thank You Scientists apart, which is their sense of humor. From the pack of these really self-serious, intense, technical musicians. They had a hotline that you could call with these cryptic messages about the album. They made fun of Greta Van Fleet in a little video, which is always fun. I mean, the band themselves called this album the Oops, I Did It Again of progressive rock. And Notes and I discovered Thank You Scientists in very similar ways, seeing them live, him opening for the band Haken, and myself. So I saw them open for Coheed back in 2014, and I'll say the exact same thing. Live, they are incredible. Mm-hmm. And I saw them again recently, and I was actually right in front of the stage.
Oh.
And they have a new lineup now that's coming in with this album. But I think they've been touring with them for a while now. It feels like they're invested in it, and they were probably more part of the actual I don't know about writing, but they're definitely involved in the product. It's not just like we're along for the ride.
Yeah, for sure. I took one of my best friends to see it, and she could not stop laughing at the crowd because everybody would try to headbang, but everybody was on a different time signature. So it wasn't until they got to the chorus where everybody lined up.
Yeah,
which was
you
hilarious.
Think you've got it, and then it's like, nope.
Not quite.
And I think those obscure, kind of bizarre promotional techniques are really effective. It seems like, more than most bands, they're going out of their way to make this an experience for fans and not just a typical album cycle of, give me your money.
FXMLDR. How would you even pronounce that?
I read online that it's a character from X-Files.
Oh, okay.
It's supposed to be Fox Mulder. I have no idea. I've never seen the show,
I guess that... Yeah, that makes sense. Fox Mulder. The whole thing was produced using solar power, which was pretty amazing. And all of their get-ups are just over the top ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Very 80s, short shorts. They're all wearing ridiculous t-shirts. And again, it just emphasizes that amount of fun that they're all having.
Mm-hmm. That levity helps you stomach the insanity of the music.
Yeah, for sure. And I think maybe that's why I love watching them live, because I can see the duality there. I can see just that whimsical, fun, hey, don't worry about it atmosphere within such technical, jazzy playing styles.
Mm-hmm. So this is their third album. They started with Maps of Non-Existent Places, which I still think is probably my favorite.
Oh, okay.
That one's really near and dear to me. Mm-hmm. I love it. And then they joined Evil Inc. Records, which is actually Claudio Sanchez from Coheed's record label. They did Stranger Heads Prevail in 2016, and then, this is their third one. So they obviously don't rush it, but to even create this much music, this album's 84 minutes long, in 3 years is very impressive. So fun fact about them, or about this album, I looked up terraforming. Yes. I had no idea what that meant. I figured it had to do with Earth, Terra, and something.
From my experience and from my recollection, because this is what I knew about it coming in, isn't that where you affect the environment of a distant planet to become hospitable to your race?
This guy, librarian over
here.
Hey! Such an evocative phrase and idea.
Yeah.
That you could just spend a lot of time listening to the lyrics and piecing that together.
I know we were discussing this earlier, but this is an album that you can't really digest in full after one sitting. For the longest time, I didn't really appreciate how long it was. I was almost starting to tap out. It was almost a little too much for me at times. But now that I've gotten pretty much a full week of just nothing but this album, I've really come to appreciate kind of the scope, the grand scale, and the length of it.
So you think it's justified that it's that long?
At this point, yes. Because I kept thinking, what would I cut from it? The only thing that I can think of them doing is splitting this into like 2 40-minute albums. But again, where would you draw the line of which track or what goes onto which? Because as a full, unique whole, it all kind of works together. So.
Yeah, I feel the same way. If I think about tracks in the later part of the album where I started to feel a little bit fatigued, that was probably Anchor.
Yeah.
But if I take a track like that on its own and separate it, it is like I can't slight it in any way. Even being experienced with this kind of music, it is pretty hard to get through the entire thing in one sitting.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up Anchor, because I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm like, oh, well, I could probably do without Anchor, and in all honesty, like, Terraformer might be my least favorite track off of this album, seeing as it's the ending piece. But Anchor actually holds one of my favorite moments on the album, which is that guitar work near the end. When I was about 13 years old, I loved cottage cheese, still do. Now, this is a huge tangent, but stay with me here.
Yeah.
So I bought like a tub of cottage cheese, and I just decided to like eat the whole thing. By the end of it, I was just like, wow, that, again, but then revisiting it for like a meal here or a meal there or a meal over there, I came to really appreciate it for what it was, and I was able to like really love cottage cheese again.
Yeah, Michael comes to appreciate everything in moderation.
In moderation. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah. That's beautiful, you know.
Oh, thank
you. I
you.
love thinking about you as a kid, just like, this is good, but there's a lot of potential here. So this album, it's I do feel like there is some redundancy, a little bit, yet I have a hard time criticizing it in any way and actually being critical of it at all, because I recognize the serious work ethic that goes into something like this, and creativity and collaboration, to have 6 or 7 guys with artistic ideas of their own trying to come together and make compromises, and I mean that's a major feat.
Oh, for sure. And I think like the star performer, or at least one of the star performers on this album, is Chromology. The thing that I love about it is because there's so many different personalities, it would be so easy for a track like this just to drown out everybody and just be noise. But the fact that you can hear everybody's input on this track, and everybody's allowed to have their own space, and nobody drowns out anybody else, I think is a real testament to not only their artistic creativity, but also of this collaboration among artists. It was such a joy to see how they were able to balance all these little nuances between all the different musicians. So I really appreciate that, and I think you were definitely right in, you know, there is something to be applauded for so many players on this album working together.
Yeah, they do a lot that couldn't be done with a typical rock outfit like a Rush or something. And part of that is just music theory-wise. You know, there's a lot of harmonics that and chord voicings that are unique, and the way that they're able to play with that, they have a much more expansive vocabulary than most bands, because they have so many options.
Probably my favorite track of them all is Geronimo.
Geronimo, yeah, I love that one too.
I love, and for 2 reasons. One, I love the placement of this track. Like I'm a stickler when it comes to album structure and how an album comes together as a whole. And I love the fact that this is the one that follows up Chromology. Yep. Because it starts off very slow, very intimate. It doesn't just blow down the doors, and it really takes its time to build itself up. That
guitar lead, it reminds me a little bit of like Incubus. Like if you think of something from like Morning View, that Mike Einzinger kind of does those bends, like pretty sure Geronimo is meant in like the way that when you shout when you're jumping out of a plane.
Oh yeah,
like that sort of thing.
I don't think
it has much
about
to do with the
actual
Apache
person.
leader. But
yeah, no, that's something that I love about this album, is kind of the running concepts, because there's quite a few, but the overall thing is like, leaps of faith.
Yeah.
Trying to find home, feeling like an alien or an outsider. And I feel like all of those really converge so well. And another track that I love, and I actually had to stop, was Everyday Ghosts. Specifically with, sometimes I feel so ordinary.
Yeah.
And the only way that I've survived is right here where I am. Some of that is just like, ugh.
He has a kind of equivocal, vague lyrical approach, which I think is pretty common for rock music in general, where it's they're not playing all their cards. He's not giving anything or everything away.
Yeah.
But you can tell that there's a little bit of rage, bitterness. He's cynical or critical about some outside force, maybe political leader, elite class, something like that. And he's trying to find meaning and connect with something internal in the midst of that. And there's even a song, which is probably my favorite song in the album. One of the more unique ones is Birdwatching.
Yeah, it reminded me of some of the smaller Haken songs with, like, I don't know if it's a drum machine or whatever they were using with that one.
Yeah, they got the drum pad. And then there's like even that little drum and bass solo thing that's almost like Autechre or some crazy electronic thing at the end. It was inspired by a dog, like watching birds out the window. But you can get, you can see a metaphor for like watching the world from inside your space and seeing all these things come crashing. And there's a line in there that's, they're undeserving of their wings. I find it hard to sympathize. And it just really hit me, and I'm not sure exactly what to make of it, but it just, again, it was just one of those cutting moments, like you said, with Everyday Ghosts.
Yeah.
Kind of cut through the complexity and the intellectual part of the music and got really personal and got emotional.
Yeah.
Another thing about Birdwatching is, often progressive rock, I feel like, is lacking on the progressive end.
Yep.
It's it's like you call it progressive rock, but it's really like a distinctive thing, and a lot of bands that play in the style don't really change their sound or evolve over time.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And this is one where I felt like they tried something completely new, and and they nailed it. And
it's almost like what King Crimson was attempting to do back in the late 90s, early 2000s, with just experimenting with rhythm sections, with time signatures, and incorporating technology into that.
I remember watching your videos. You had some, I don't know if you call them starter packs. That might have been too Fantano of you. But where would you say Thank You Scientist fits into that whole spectrum of sounds in progressive rock music?
Yeah, they're definitely more of the modern prog. They're akin to, again, this is the librarian in me, where I'm always kind of cataloging. Like, when you listen to Thank You Scientists, they sound like of the now.
Have you heard the band Aqueous before?
I haven't, no.
Got some of the same like funk elements.
I can understand the hesitancy to give them a label, because they are kind of all over the spectrum in terms of musical styles. When people hear modern, there almost comes like a negative connotation of it, but I see that as a very positive thing, because they're emulating the music scene to the best of their abilities right now. They're capturing the spirit of the time so perfectly.
It seems to me a paradox to pair that with progressive.
True, but in my mind, it's the music itself that progresses. So it's their idea of pushing the music within the song forward, like regressing the song.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
I think the sound of progressive rock, but almost just due to the nature of knowing this as a label or a grouping or a scene, it almost cuts against the very nature of progressing.
Yeah, it does.
Because all of a sudden it becomes this rote rehearsal of the same tropes from this type of music.
Yeah, I remember one of my very early videos was me trying to make peace with these two distinct ideologies when it comes to progressive rock. This need to move the music forward and to go into uncharted territories and to progress the music scene. But this current trend that started probably in like the mid to late 90s of emulating the music scene from the 70s that was doing this. It's like the progressive rock community was bashing their heads against those artists that were trying to emulate the artists from the 70s, like we'll say like Spock's Beard or the Flower Kings. So
nostalgic and
very nostalgic, and that's where, in my mind, that's where like retro prog or neo prog comes from.
I guess what I'm getting at with Thank You Scientists is I feel like they are a band that moves the needle forward. However, I would think it would be incredibly challenging for people outside of this scene to get into this. If it's hard for me to make it through an 84-minute album when I've listened to every Dream Theater album in depth, you know?
Yeah, it's difficult in a number of ways because there's no entry point. Like, at least with Dream Theater, you can tag on, you know, if you like Metallica or if you like these other bands or if you like Rush. With Thank You Scientists, the only bands that kind of come to mind are maybe like Coheed and Cambria, but it's so far beyond that. Trying to get somebody new into it, unless they're like a really big music theory nerd, would be extremely difficult.
I could see, you know, like a jazz head or even someone who likes 70s 80s yacht rock or something like that. Steely Dan or something like that.
Yeah,
that incorporates
like,
that jazz element.
I'm even picturing like I could introduce this to my stepmother who loves like Tower of Power and those really big brass jazz bands.
What's your favorite solo from this album? Instrumental performance? What do you think is the highlight? Because there's so many and everyone has a little moment across the whole thing, from Ben Karras on the violin to, you know, Tom Monda's all over this thing with the crazy guitars.
Anchor, I was just like, oh, I don't even know if I really like this song. But then when that guitar work came in at the latter part of that song, that's where I'm like, no, this is probably the peak. This is it.
The melodic line is very similar to one of their older songs.
Okay.
Mr. Invisible. Their music has a formula to it that you can recognize. It's hard to articulate exactly what that is, but I think of a lot of like builds with like like pre-chorus builds and then these big transcendent choruses. Yeah. You can pick out a Thank You Scientist progression or lick, I think, pretty easily. I'd say another one of my favorites was Son of a Serpent. I really like those first few tracks, really, and I think that's something they've done on all their albums, is make those first few really interesting and like hooky, just to get you into it. The line "Tired of the Things I Put Me Through" and that melody on the chorus is probably my favorite moment on the record.
Yeah, they give you the goods right away.
And then on Chromology, that there's a bass solo in the middle of it, and it kind of has this like really thick, muddy, Les Claypool sort of sound to it. You get so much noodling and you kind of get over it eventually, but that was one that was like, whoa, okay.
What is this? Yeah, it's definitely an onslaught to the ears. And my relationship with this album has waxed and waned throughout the entire week, and I'm sure throughout the rest of the year it's going to continue. Originally, the first couple of tracks, I'm like, this is so good, but then as it continued on, I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
Sensory overload.
I gotta tap out. I can now appreciate just the epic scope and scale of this album to a point where, you know, it's probably like, I'd be shocked if it doesn't end in my top 5 albums of this year.
Yeah.
For just how much it's grown on me. Because originally I was gonna say, this is maybe a stream. Like, I don't know if this is really for me, but it blossomed into such a grand enterprise by the end of it that I couldn't not listen to it.
Yeah. I think if we go back to the conversation about prog and finding a gateway into that, I don't think this is music that it needs intentional attention. You know, it needs full engagement, and I think that your enjoyment of it is equal, or the growth potential you have in enjoying it is equal to the time they spent crafting it and creating it. Because it's just an endless treasure trove, I feel like, of and that's how all their albums have been, and this one it's more so detail wise. I don't even think I can give it a number because again there's, I would say maybe 8, but I haven't come to an opinion yet. I'm
doing the same thing. This is definitely like a highly recommended one. Trying to give it like an actual number is near impossible. I can't say that it's a complete masterpiece, because if it was a complete masterpiece, I feel like anybody could appreciate it. For me, a masterpiece, I could just recommend to anybody on the street, you should listen to this.
Yeah.
And they could find something out of it.
A song from The Perils of Time Travel, their first little EP, is my very own A-Punk. My little slice of hell every time I get in a car is their song Abandoned Ship. Because if I plug my phone in, just... there's something about the way you move. Well, that's it. Thanks again, Notes, for joining me. Hopefully we'll get to do it again soon. This is a pretty big one, and I think we both really loved it. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. This is like your little turn. That's another one of your little send-offs.